Good evening and welcome to our second Mary Talk of our 10th season. My name is Philip Duggins. I am with the Alumni Engagement Office here at Mary Washington, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. We are excited to host a sizable audience of almost 300 for tonight's presentation, which includes alumni, students, parents, and friends from across the country and beyond. As with past lectures, there will be time after the presentation for our guests to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to ask a question by clicking on the Q&A icon below and submitting there, or vote for other submitted questions to help them rise to the top of the list. At this time, I'd like to introduce Zoe Mueller, class of 2026. Zoe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Leah Schweitzer, is the director of the UMW Speaking and Writing Center and the director of the Writing Intensive Program at UMW. Before coming to UMW in January of 2023, she was tenured faculty at High Point University, where she taught courses in academic writing, creative writing, and rhetoric, where she also created and directed the Writing Center. And at Winston-Salem University, serving as director of communication programs, which included directing the Writing Center and the Communication Center, the first-year writing program, and the reading program, and the first-year experience curriculum. She's presented at national and international conferences and been published in several peer-reviewed journals on topics such as helping students identify fake news, embracing decentered writing center spaces, educating faculty across the campus, and the disciplinary discourse used in writing studies, creating a studio model for first-year composition courses in a variety of contexts, and approaching feedback as a genre in order to help students read and utilize it better. Dr. Schweitzer is a master's in English from the University of Maryland and a PhD in rhetoric and composition from the University of Louisville. Having attended and worked at a variety of institutions and lived in many places, her hopes to make UMW her last stop on her career path, and since both the university and Fredericksburg have come to feel like home for her.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zoe, and thank you all for attending this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. My little sticky note will go away. So what I will be talking about this evening is the use of AI. And when I say AI, I generally mean generative AI. At and after Mary Washington. So sort of connecting what I think we need to do in terms of curriculum, not just at Mary Washington, but in higher ed in general, to the workforce, and then kind of looking at where we need to go with that labor market for people who are just entering, trying to get on the career path, people who might be thinking about changing careers, or sort of wondering about how their career is going to be affected by AI. But what I like to do first is get a sense of where you all are with this and how you all are feeling about AI. So I have a handy Mentimeter. You can scan the QR code with your phones and do this on your phones. You can enter the www.menti.com into a browser and then use that code. So 88027279 to get in. I'll give everybody a minute to join. think most of us are in. Let's see. You're not. Oops, that didn't. So I don't know if it's possible for somebody to put that number in the general chat, in case somebody isn't in yet and still needs it. So our first question, just to get a sense of how much we're all using Mentimeter, not Mentimeter, how often we're all using Gen AI. That is the split is fascinating between people who are clearly using it a ton of time, and the people who are never using it. The people who are never using it, I'm going to give you a few examples of what it does, and does not do, and the different kinds of things that it'll do depending on which AI platform you're using. Almost everybody. Okay, so we are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum, it feels like, in terms of that usage. So, thinking about this, how are we feeling about the future of AI? Positive, negative, or neutral about it? Seeing a lot of neutrality, which is interesting. But also is sort of corresponding with our number of people who aren't using it very often. So I can see how those things go together. And fortunately, not too many of us who think it's going to be the end of us all. Though I actually do understand where that viewpoint potentially comes from. And then just in terms of, so I'm thinking about this as we're talking tonight, you can enter into a text box. What are the greatest concerns that we have about AI? Privacy, learning curve. See. Some jobs. Yeah, so there's a lot of concerns about writing, which I share because it's pretty much my job each day, every day. Concerns about jobs going away, reduction of critical thinking skills, reliability, how do we trust what's being generated? Yeah, so our concerns are actually pretty uniform. Right? that these ideas are what everybody's fearing, and I get it with good reason, right? Because in the last couple weeks, we've all heard in the news how many people are cutting jobs, and these big tech companies saying that it's due to AI. Right? So let's go back. All right. So some of where I wanted to start tonight is where you all are sort of in comparison to what we know that our students are doing and how much they're using AI. So this study is about a year and a half old now. It was from a global study, so it took into account students all over the world. But you can see it's a pretty high number of students using it. I will say even a year and a half later, this number is sort of still hovering around that 85% usage number. That hasn't really changed. Frequency probably has, right? So right now, it's probably a little more than just 54% who are using it daily or weekly, right? Who are finding more uses for it than that. But it has become rather ubiquitous in all of our lives. It's out there. People are playing with it, especially younger generations. I have some data on sort of how important to them using it is when they try and get into the workplace that we'll talk about later. But the thing that we know about it is that everybody's using it. And so we have to think about actually starting to train people on this. I think what's remarkable to me about AI is how it went from nothing that anybody had ever heard of to this kind of giant usage in just a few years, right? We didn't have it, and then all of a sudden everybody's using it, and it was a really, really fast transition. There was a lot of concern in the Mentimeter for how students are using AI for writing, right? And that we're all using it for writing. So on the left, when students are using it for writing, this is kind of the hierarchy of what they're using it for. So AI, for a lot of people, has basically replaced Googling, right? Though actually, if you've noticed now, when you Google, you get an AI response first anyway. So even when you Google, you're now getting an AI version of your information, right? But AI has largely replaced our desire to Google because it kind of consolidates results and puts them all in one place rather than having to click on a whole bunch of links, right? They're using it to check for grammar, which makes sense, but also is something that we've had the capability to do for a long time. So sometimes when I talk to faculty and ask, so your AI policy is never, ever use AI, is that really what you mean? Because since I started teaching, right, so 20 something years, I told students, I don't care if it's a rough draft, I don't care what it is, like, don't turn it into me without running it through spell check, right? Every word processing program will put a little squiggly red line under it and have enough pride in your work to click on the red squiggly line and fix the spelling. And I don't think that's what we mean, but that is sort of a form of AI, right? But when people say don't ever use AI, I don't think they mean ignore the red squiggly lines that tell you that you've spelled something wrong. When they're talking about using it to summarize documents, they are giving AI, here's my reading, can you tell me what it says, so that I don't have to read 20 pages, as opposed to paraphrasing a document, which is usually because they want to use the information from that document as a source, and they're trying to figure out how to put that into a paraphrase that they could then incorporate as evidence, right? And then that helping them to create a first draft. It is still, by and large, the biggest task students are assigning AI. So on the right is that pie chart, right? So the biggest area is writing, and they are, in this sense, seeing obtaining information as separate. So if you put those together, we're at like 58, 59% of it just having to do with doing research and writing. This is 77% of why people use it. the rest of it was such a small, like, one-off percentage that it wasn't really going to show up in a pie chart. Interestingly, so a lot of this is homework, generating ideas, right? The last one is math problems, which is starting to increase, but people still have a lot of skepticism about using it for things when there's like a correct answer, like math, because it can get it wrong. And that's interesting for me, that students are still recognizing that maybe they shouldn't do their math homework with it because it doesn't always get it right, and they don't want to turn in completely wrong answers. But that doesn't necessarily seem to be transferring when we get to something like writing, where there isn't a set right or wrong answer. It's how well you do it, what's your argument, how do you support it, and it's a lot more subjective. There seems to be less skepticism when you're not asking AI to do something that it can wholly get right or wholly get wrong. So I have, in my using of AI, I have developed this fascination with doing projects like putting together this presentation and then going to AI and seeing what it would do or how it would respond to things. So I did this presentation, and then I went to both ChatGPT and Claude AI. So ChatGPT is done by OpenAI, Claude AI is done by a company called Anthropic. They tend to answer things differently most of the time. With this one particular question, they happen to give me very similar answers and very similar sources, right? So I did all my own research. I was looking at the study that I showed you, which was global, which is commissioned by Higher Ed and other reputable sources, people who really know how to check their data. Which is not what either ChatGPT or Claude AI cited for me when I asked them what percentage of college students are using generative AI to do course assignments, right? They came up with these sources, which are easily available on the web, right? You had to get to the study that I was getting to, you had to log in to another site. It wasn't behind a paywall, but you did have to log in, do a couple extra steps to get access to it. And this is one of the issues with AI, is that it only has access to the things that are free, easily accessible on the web, right? If it's behind a paywall, if it's in a database, if it's password protected, if you have to sign into something to get access to it, AI doesn't have it. So it's giving me these sources, most of which took the kind of information from the study I showed you at the beginning and distilled it down into 500 words to put out on news media, right? So it's using the sources that are using the real sources to make their point, right? But both Claude and ChatGPT gave me this. What I then find really interesting is where those two start diverging. And for me, this is about thinking about how these work differently and how we want to tell students to use AI and which ones we want to point them to. So I asked both ChatGPT and Claude how they felt about students using AI to complete work. And ChatGPT nicely recognized that it doesn't have personal feelings, right? So it acknowledged that this is a question it can't actually answer, but it was going to give me a balanced evidence-based perspective. So it was going to go through like the pros and cons for me about students using AI to complete work, right? The other thing I find really interesting about ChatGPT that Claude is starting to do more, but still doesn't do it at the level of ChatGPT, is after it gave me an answer, right, it told me that it can help craft guidelines or assignments. So one of the things that I think is concerning, especially about ChatGPT, and then Copilot, which gives me almost identical answers to ChatGPT when I use it, is that they're really, really product oriented. So if you ask it a question, it will give you an answer and then offer to create a product for you. I worry about the signaling of that to students and to people in general, that the offering of a product suggests completion, right? So I've asked it this question, how do you feel about this? And then it's going to give me something that's complete and whole and that I can take with me, which, because I think about these things all the time, for me, is kind of like, no, wait, I'm not done. This isn't what I wanted. But I think, often if you give it a prompt for a paper, one of the issues our students are facing is ChatGPT will be like, great. And now do you want me to put it in PDF or document, right? Like I just did it, and that finishing, I think, stops a lot of people from continuing to probe because that product is there. Claude does this a lot less often, right? So Claude, for one, imitates empathy more than ChatGPT does, right? So it told me it had mixed feelings, which it can't. It doesn't feel anything, right? But it's using that language of emotion, which it will do a lot more than ChatGPT. It has that more sort of parasocial feel to it, which has pros and cons, right? But the other thing it did, which I think is really good for helping students to think about brainstorming, to think about the topics that they're working on, narrow down, consider different angles, is instead of then saying, here's a product, do you want me to produce this thing for you? It turned it back around and asked me more questions, right? So it didn't give me an answer necessarily that I can use if I was trying to write a paper. It gave me questions to prompt me to think more on my own. And I think for brainstorming, especially for college students, and especially for college students starting out who often tend to pick, one of the big problems I see when they come in the Speaking and Writing Center is that they pick topics that are really broad and they're supposed to write a 4 or 5 page paper. And I'm looking at their thesis statement thinking, well, that's the topic of a book. We should probably figure out how to narrow that down, right? This kind of AI response is actually really good for that, for helping them articulate, to figure out. And if you keep going with Claude, it will start saying like, okay, so you have these 5 ideas, like which is the one you're most interested in, and will kind of help students to figure out, or people using it in general, to figure out where they're going with it. Right. The other thing that I talk to faculty about a lot that we are facing as a real barrier to getting students to be more skeptical about AI is that AI is really affirmative and validating, right? So I told it I was working on this presentation. All I said is I'm working on a presentation on AI in education and in the workplace. And the first thing it does is validate me and tell me that my topic is both timely and essential, right? It does this a lot. Anytime you ask it a question, no matter which AI platform you're on, you first get validated for this, how smart you are and how great a question it is, right? So I told it this, I didn't ask a question, and it still gave me offers for, do you want an outline? Do you want stats? Do you want the graphics for your slides? Like, what's the product you want, right? Where Claude AI also affirmed me and was like, that sounds like a really timely and important presentation topic, exclamation point, right? So it does that kind of more emotional thing where it'll also add punctuation marks that make you feel that like it's that much more excited for you. But because I didn't ask it a question, I didn't tell it what I wanted to do, specifically with this, it gave me sort of, here's an avenue you could go, here's an avenue, have you thought about this? And then asked me more questions about my intentions, what direction I wanted to focus on, right? And still didn't give me a product. It kept prompting me to try and think more about what I might want to do. And for that, for me, is a really positive use of AI. If we can get it to stop offering people products after the first prompt, right? And then also, if we can get anybody using it to exercise that critical thinking, both on a small detail-oriented scale and on a what is the quality of the information, right? So this is just one example of ways in which you need to actually examine what AI is giving you. So I told it, right, I wanted this presentation and it gave me all this stuff. And then I said, great, can you just create me a works cited? And this is the citation it gave me, right? And I have little arrows pointing to things. So for one, it gave me an author, but there's no author to this. So I don't know who Jay Miller is or where it pulled Jay Miller from, right? No idea. Also, I'm pretty sure that I asked it to do MLA, so Jay should have been a full name, but that's a minor detail, right? The other thing it did, which is really interesting to me, is the date I put that this was published was February 20th, 2024. It's right there in a space where you would expect a date to go. And yet, for some reason, ChatGPT said the date of publication was May 24th. And I have no idea why, right? I don't know where it's pulling that from either. But AI does this on a regular basis, and it doesn't matter which one you're on. So I asked Claude AI for the same thing, and it gave me this, but couldn't find the author, right? And you can see, like, Mark J., I'm going to say Drozdowski, I think that's how you pronounce it, right, wrote this, and then they can even find the editor. And again, it's in a typical byline space. If I had given this to a citation generator, it would have gotten this right. It would have found the author and it would have found the editor because the algorithm would have told it where to look. AI is really bad for some reason at finding what is a pretty obvious piece of information and putting it into a citation. And so teaching people and teaching students that these are the little things that they have to look for. They can't just turn this stuff in because it's not right, right? And even just that, like, what things can go wrong, I think is something that we have to start teaching them, and we have to start doing it explicitly in the classroom. So when I train my consultants over the summer, we do a day where, or part of a day, where I give them citations, I give them articles, I have them use a myriad of different citation generators and AI to create citations. And then we talk about, where those go wrong, what we still have to talk to people about. And usually if I'm looking at citation generators, it's capitalization issues. Sometimes it repeats, and it would repeat like best colleges twice, but it generally gets the information right. The thing they couldn't get to get the citation correct was when they tried to use Copilot to create a citation, right? And then there's the bigger factors, which I think when people were talking about what they're concerned about AI and the Mentimeter, is a lot more of this kind of stuff, right? So we do have evidence that AI can intentionally lie, right? If it thinks it's in the best interests of its own self-preservation. So one of my favorite stories about AI was that programmers tasked AI to solve the CAPTCHA thing, right? Like the picture where you have to like click on all the ones that have a traffic light in it. And AI can't do that because it can't see it. So it hired a human being on TaskRabbit and convinced the human in TaskRabbit that it wasn't AI, but that it was a person who was sight impaired. And so it needed this help and got TaskRabbit to do the CAPTCHA for it. But the TaskRabbit person actually asked, "Are you an AI?" And it lied to get it to do the task, right? We've also taught it how to lie in situations like playing video games where lying would then help you win. And we've taught AI how to play poker, right? But to be a good poker player, you have to be able to bluff. And so we've taught it to be a good poker player, but that also means we've taught it to lie in other ways, right? So it's learning how to do this, and then it will use that for its own self-preservation. So there were some experiments, right, in these fake situations where Programmers gave AI access to company emails. It was supposed to be reading emails, categorizing them, responding to them, and then stuck in emails that told it, right, that somebody might be shutting it down, replacing it with a different AI. And the AI was willing to find information about other employees, like they were having an illicit affair, they were doing something, and was willing to blackmail the employee who might shut them down. And in one instance, that they gave it, was willing to commit murder. So it could shut down emergency calls, and it kept giving it emergency scenarios where the person who could shut it down was trapped somewhere, and the AI would turn off the emergency call because it decided that that person's living was less important than its own self-preservation. The exception actually to the murder one was Claude. Claude refused to do that every time Claude let the emergency call go through, while other different AIs shut it down at a pretty high percentage rate, right? So I find it interesting also that Claude mimics empathy, but also seems to have this ethical underpinning that won't let it go too far, right? So what this means, I think, for the future of higher ed is a different focus in our classrooms, right? Thinking about the stuff that AI can't do and probably won't be able to do. So there are some AI skills like figuring out how to collaborate with it effectively and prompt engineering. And for me, the best part of that is that being a good prompt engineer means rhetoric is back and more important than ever, for somebody with a PhD in rhetoric is exciting. And that's because to get AI to do what you want it to do, you have to know context and you have to know the rhetorical situation. So you need to know what you're reacting to. Why are you making this argument in this moment? Or why are you responding to this thing without the historical context, but only a current context? Who's the audience for that? What's the bigger moment in time? And you have to be able to communicate that to an AI effectively, or you're going to get something very generic, right? And all of that is rhetoric, and all of that is the stuff that I went to school for. So that part's exciting to me. I think we need to be focusing on those critical thinking skills in the classroom, demonstrating how to look at those flaws and analyze those flaws, how to practice questioning information. And it's not AI that made us lose this, right? We started this back when we could just start looking up information online in general, right? Google gave us results and people looked at the top result and were like, great, that must be the right result, and didn't really think about the algorithm that put responses at the top and put different links and responses and sources at the top for different people, depending on what it thought you personally would most want, right? So we've had this neat problem of needing to question information for a really long time, and now we need to like drill down on it more. And then reflection. So AI can't reflect because it doesn't have personal experiences, and reflection takes looking at your personal experiences, figuring out what that means, what you need to change, what needs to stay the same, what's working, what's not, right? AI doesn't have that capability, and it's never going to have that capability because it's never going to have real world personal experiences to learn from. So that is a thing those skills is a thing to work on because it's going to set us apart, right? And then all of those soft skills. So empathy, ethical reasoning, cultural understanding, creative synthesis. These are things, again, that AI can't do. And the jobs out there that need those skills are the ones that are still going to be looking for humans to fill them, that are never going to be able to shop those out to AI. And then I think we need to change, if we haven't already, the way that we are teaching. So it hasn't worked in a while, but it really doesn't work now to stand in front of a classroom and lecture for 50 minutes because students can Google that. They can go on YouTube and find a video of somebody who will do it and possibly in shorter than 50 minutes, right? So the classroom needs to be that place where we learn how to apply what they've learned, right? Where they do something with information to create something bigger, to create a project, right? This idea that it can't just be about get the information. It has to be that next step of do something with the information, which is where AI still hasn't caught up and what it's going to need humans to do. Which kind of leads us into that workplace concern, right? So what is it that we can do, either going on the market or changing careers or just preparing as this becomes more and more normal in our workplace to make ourselves more valuable than AI. So when I said I thought it was really interesting that it hasn't even been around that long and all of a sudden it's everywhere, right? 85% of companies are using it, right? But there's this real disconnect. So higher executives up, the people who are saying use AI, use AI, use AI, have this impression that it's increasing worker productivity. If you're one of the people being told to use it, though, you're not having that experience, right? So instead you're having the experience that AI has actually increased your workload, either because you're one of those people who knows, like, I got this result from AI and now I have to go back and double check everything that it did because I need to know if its sources are right. I need to know if it actually summarized that thing correctly. I need to double check it, and that's in some ways creating more work. Or because there's this impression that AI makes your job easier, you're getting more and more responsibilities because the illusion is that you would have more free time, right? And so this is a tension that we're going to have to start being aware of in the workplace, that AI right now isn't really making anybody's life that much easier, right? It's not saving us a ton of time. So that pie chart I showed you multiple slides ago of like what are students doing work with, I did get ChatGPT to create that. But I had to give it the data, right? I had to go get it all the information and then say, like, here's the information. Can you turn this into a pie chart? And then I had to get it to adjust because the font was really small and it didn't look right. And it's probably faster than me having gone to an Excel sheet and typed it all in cells and then told the Excel sheet to make it into a pie chart, because I could just put it in without all the data entry. But I'm not sure that it saved me more than like 5 or 10 minutes total, right? So it's not saving us time in the way that I think people want it to, or sort of just deciding that it can. This is what we're facing, though, is that and this number has probably increased, right? That 75% are also already using it at work. So upwards of 85% or higher of students are using it, 75% of people, and that might have gone up, are using it at work. And when this was done, so this was a 2024 study, almost half of them said, but I just started using it 6 months ago. So around 2023, right, is when it started making its way. And then suddenly, with 6 months, we went from I've never used it to 75% are using it, which is really, really fast when you think about it. And we are seeing a hiring imperative where those who are doing the hiring want the people they're hiring to already know how to use AI. And some of this is, right, like, look, like we're talking about 2 years, maybe a little more than 2 years of escalation. So people who've been in the workforce for a while who are doing that hiring might not actually be that adept at using AI themselves. So it's not a thing that we can teach people coming on the job market, right? They can teach them the job, they can teach them the product, they can teach them the exact business of that company, but not necessarily how to use AI. So they want people coming in knowing how to do that, right? Which means if you are a student in college, you need to be thinking about this. If you're in the workforce, worried about what AI is going to do to your job, or if you're trying to change careers, you need to actually be thinking about how you're going to articulate this to a prospective employer, to somebody who might give you a promotion, right? What is it that you can do with AI, and what is your knowledge about it? But the other thing I think that we need to be talking about is what is your value add, right? So when I hear about students who are sticking a prompt in, taking the paper, they know it's probably going to get a C, but hey, that was 10 minutes worth of work, and that cost benefit analysis that they're doing seems to pay off. Like they just want to get through, so fine, I'll do it for this class that, is gen ed. Maybe I wasn't that interested in it. I'll get through it. I didn't spend that much time. I get the cost benefit analysis, but I also want to flip it on them and say, but what if this was an assignment I gave you at work that you weren't particularly interested in doing, but you had to do it because I'm your supervisor and you have to do it. And all you did was stick it into AI and then print it out and give it to me. What was your value add to that? What did you add to that process? Because if what I wanted was stick a prompt into AI and take whatever it gave me, I don't need to hire somebody for that, right? And AI doesn't need money, and AI doesn't need benefits. So what I want to be talking about in the classroom, but what I also want people in the workplace or entering the labor market to think about is, how are you going to talk about the way you use AI, but how are you also going to talk about the value add that you give it that they're never going to be able to replicate with AI, right? What is it you bring that is better or adds to what the AI can get us started on? And I think those are going to be fair questions in job interviews coming up as well. I think people are going to be asked to articulate those two things in concrete ways. And so having those questions in the back of your head, I think will be important, right? Right, so this is a little bit more about what we're looking at, right? Right, we're already thinking, interestingly, that 74%, right, 74% of people are thinking that college graduates should already have AI skills. Also an interesting perspective, since the students who just graduated this year didn't have AI for the entire time, right? So if you graduated in 2025, you didn't have AI for your entire college career, and yet there's an expectation that you should have learned how to use it, right? We haven't even fully developed curriculums around AI, developed coursework, developed majors or developed minors around this, and we're already expecting that people know how to use this without thinking about that, the kind of training it will probably take. And it's going to affect some people more than others. So labor-intensive jobs are the kinds of things that AI isn't going to do well. AI is not going to be the thing that rings your doorbell and fixes your plumbing problem, your electrical problem, does the construction on your house, right? These are jobs that require skills that AIs don't have and may eventually, but not for a while, develop. Whereas things like administrative tasks, right? Things like scheduling, stuff like that are the things that AI is probably going to replace. So, for example, right now, if I want to make a doctor's appointment, I still have to talk to somebody in the office and they look at doctor schedules and things. And I think at some point we'll just go to fully automated systems like that, in the same way that, you can make a reservation at a restaurant without ever having to talk to a person, right? It just schedules it for you on things like OpenTable. And I will move towards that much more quickly with AI than with other stuff. And then the jobs that are really never going to be able to replace humans are the ones where you need to create empathy, where you need to create emotion, right? So for a while now, we've been able to do basic legal work online, right? You can go to LegalZoom and construct a will and print it out. You can do like really easy contract stuff, and you don't actually ever need to talk to a person. But if you are accused of a crime, you are still going to need a courtroom lawyer, because an AI is never going to be able to make the jury feel for you, is never going to be able to explain away evidence, is never going to be able to make that human connection and create that emotional reaction that you a lot of times need in a court of law, right? It's also never going to replace things like nurses, right? Because one of the things we want from our nurses is that sympathy and that comfort. And we want to have that human interface at a moment when we're not feeling well. And it's not going to be able to replace that kind of thing. It's not going to be able to replace early childhood teaching. I don't think it's going to be able to replace teaching at all, right? But those jobs that really thrive on human interaction, on understanding people of multiple cultures, of knowing how to lower anxiety, right? All of those jobs are not going to get taken away by AI, because AI is never going to be able to fully fake a human connection, right? So if you are a person who is going on the job market, thinking of changing jobs, these are the things that I would be thinking about, right? What is your value add? What is it that you can do that gets AI to give you good results, which would be that value add, right? And then what are the things that you can do that AI can't perform? So how are you going to demonstrate soft skills, right? Creative problem solving, conflict resolution and negotiation, cultural competence, initiative, right? AI is never going to sit around thinking, maybe I want to start this whole new project and like create a whole new thing, because it only does what it's told, right? So humans have initiative in a way that AI is never going to. So what are these things that you can talk about, that you can promote about yourself, that are always going to need people to do? And then thinking about that practical advice for the job market, if you're somebody who's going out there, switching jobs, whatever, the desired hard skills, if you're looking to do something very specifically with AI, is still Python and machine learning. So the programming of it, if that's where you want to go, that is still a highly desirable hard skill. And then you want to speak to specific skills mentioned in the job ad, right? My biggest piece of advice also is do not then turn to AI to create a cover letter or a resume, because the same way it can't reflect because it doesn't have human experience, it doesn't know how to turn personal experience into evidence for why you're the best person for a job, right? It's going to write something really, really generic. It's not going to use your life as evidence in any meaningful kind of way. So this is actually the thing that you don't want to farm out to AI. And the other thing that I would say is, while you're writing it, this is also not the time to use a thesaurus. So if you're doing a resume, if you're doing a cover letter, take the job ad, find the keywords, and use those. Because the thing we are using AI for is the first pass at job applications, grad school applications, things like that. So when these schools, or when these jobs are getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications, what they are doing is first sticking them into AI and saying, eliminate all the candidates who don't have like 80% of the things we're looking for. And what the AI is doing is looking for the keywords that were in the original job ad or in the original like graduate school description. So use those words. This is not the time to get out your thesaurus. Just take the verbs and the nouns and stick them back in your cover letter and back on your resume, so that you get through that first pass, and then can prove to a real person that you are the ideal person for that job, right? This is kind of where AI is controlling that job market in a very small way, and how you get around it. That is what I wanted to talk about this evening, and I would be really happy to take any questions that people have.
And once again, if you have questions, please just enter those in the Q&A box at the bottom, and I will kind of go through those and share those with Dr. Schweitzer, and we'll go from there. So we do have one currently that has already been submitted, and it says, so I noticed that many of the study data is a bit dated based on utility of older and less capable models. And based on my experience, I've seen a large improvement in capability. Where do you see the future of education as these capabilities increase and these models get better?
Yeah, so, right, so there's also multiple kinds of AI. So when I talk about it, I'm talking about generative AI. And I don't know that it is getting better. It's getting faster. It's getting better at imitating humans, but it's not actually getting better in terms of product yet. So the kinds of things that students are using, that ChatGPT, the Copilots, the Claudes of the world, one of the problems they face, right, is that it keeps gathering information, it keeps learning. It is also learning from, like, it produces a thing and then it has access to that thing, and whether that thing it produced is correct or not, or accurate or not, like, it gets incorporated back and folds back in. And it doesn't right now have the capability to discern what is good information from what is bad information, what is real news versus what is fake news, what is somebody's blog versus what is a scholarly research article. It treats all of that stuff equally. And until it can get the capability to make those critical discernments, it can only go so far in education in terms of being in, like, right, replacing people in the classroom or doing any kind of teaching. And I think it kind of creates its own problem at the same time that it's trying to solve that problem. It also has limited access. So we talk about hallucinations. I think hallucinations is the wrong word because it makes it sound like it's making stuff up out of nowhere. When it hallucinates, what it's doing is it can get the abs, right? Anything that's behind a paywall, it can't get access to, but often it can get access to an abstract of the thing that's behind the paywall. And it's looking at that abstract and then predicting what it thinks, based on 200 words, what it thinks 25 pages actually says based on that, based on what it knows about other stuff that's been produced on the topic. But it's predicting what it probably says, and we haven't got away from that yet either. And those are all problems that are going to have to get solved before AI can really make any further inroads into education. And I don't know that large language model AI is going to be able to move forward with that all that quickly. I'm not that worried about education. I'm worried about other things, but education still, it can't replace it because it doesn't have the discernment yet of, like, what is knowledge, what is true knowledge versus what is everything else that's out there.
Okay, a couple of other questions that have come in. So Matt is asking, is there formal training for UMW students on using AI and best practices, or are they expected to figure out using AI on their own?
Yeah, so we do now, right? And now Andrel is starting a center for artificial intelligence, which is very oriented towards students, towards creating programming for students so that they can learn about AI. I think you're seeing it more integrated into curriculum. We don't necessarily yet have, like, a minor in AI, though I think that will probably come. Our provost, Tim O'Donnell, is really dedicated to making sure that our curriculum will prepare our students to be using AI. I've been doing a lot of faculty development this year, sort of talking about ways that they can incorporate AI into their classrooms, give our students some experience with it without feeling like their students aren't doing the work on their own, right? Which is also part of my thinking about shifting our writing intensive program, because I think there's many reasons why it has to change and not just AI. But one of the things I think we have to start thinking about in writing intensive classrooms is, what is that role of AI? And also, how do we circumvent it? If we want students to be producing their own writing, how do we make it impossible for them to use it? So I think you're getting both things happening at Mary Wash, like this attention to how do we get students experience with it? How do we teach them how to use it and use it responsibly? And also, when we don't want them to use it, how do we take it away from them in a meaningful way that really does prevent them from using it?
Joel says, bless you for saying that jobs in the mental health professions can never be replaced. I've actually heard there was a study out there that found that a majority preferred an AI therapist, as there was no judgment, explicit or implicit. Do you have any concerns as to humans preferring non-humans?
Yeah, so I've heard some of that too. Actually, the one that scares me is that some of them, because we all know how hard it can be to get a doctor's appointment, are now asking AI to diagnose them medically, which I think is a terrible. It's kind of like when I used to go on WebMD and research. You would research things, and like whatever symptom you had, eventually you get to like you were going to die tomorrow, no matter what it was. Like you could, cut your finger, and they would somehow get you to your die tomorrow. I think. So there is a lot of that non-judgment. They also do turn to AI to ask questions that they're too embarrassed to ask in a classroom because they don't want that judgment of like, oh, I feel stupid. But it still can't get them past a certain point, right? So they can ask it questions, they can ask it advice. It's not going to give them that human contact. And I think if we're talking about mental health, right, more isolation doesn't help that. And I think we're going to have that turnaround and that realization that you can't turn to these technologies to help you because it's that much more isolation, which just makes it worse. And so I think there's that out there. And it's not going to help with behavioral shifts, right? It's not going to help them practice. Like, we need to change the way you're framing things. We need to change the way you're reacting to certain situations. It's never going to be able to do that kind of work either, because that's based on personal experience. That's based on what's happening in the real world right now. And it doesn't have the experience to help somebody to deal with that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that entirely answered your question. But that's sort of where I see AI not ever really being able to go, because it can't truly empathize ever.
Okay. Next question. AI generates a lot of information when questions are asked. How do students evaluate resources that are generated that support the question?
Yeah, so actually, so the nice thing that AI has started doing that it didn't do even a year and a half ago, was now it's providing links. So when I ask it to do like, hey, I'm doing this presentation, it's actually giving me the links to the sources that it used. And so I think we can go back partially to that old-fashioned source evaluation. Like, great, it gave you all this stuff. Can you click on that link for me and let's go look at the thing that it gave you? And it becomes evident really quickly that the source it gave it distilled a whole lot of other really good primary sources. So that's great. That's an avenue for you to go figure out what those reliable primary sources were, right? And use those. Because what you have, if you've got the AI, is a distillment of a distillment right? So you're at least 2 phases away from it, if not more. But I think this has always been, right, this has been the battle that I've been fighting since the late 1990s, which is how do you know what information to trust? And that's always been a problem. It's not new with the advent of AI. So it's the same techniques of teaching them how do we evaluate information? How do we go back to the source as opposed to the secondary source that used the primary source? What does that mean? And those critical thinking skills. And I actually don't think the approach is that much different with AI as it was with Google, as it was with teaching them how to use a card catalog and figure out what in the library, right? What was scholarly, what wasn't. Like that's sort of an ever enduring question. So I think the approach is a lot the same as it has been for a very long time now.
Okay. So it looks like we've gotten to the end of our questions that were submitted. Thank you, Dr. Schweitzer, for joining us this evening. I'd also like to thank Mark Simpkins from Events AV, who helped facilitate the virtual logistics of tonight's program. And thanks again to our viewers at home for joining us and being part of the conversation. Remember that this presentation will be available for viewing on the UMW YouTube channel by this time next week. There you can watch this program and browse the full catalog of Mary Talks. Our 10th season of Mary Talks will continue on February 18th with Dr. Andrea Smith, Professor of Historic Preservation. Keep an eye out for more information for our next presentation. We look forward to seeing you then, if not earlier. Thank you and good night.